Okay, why don't we go ahead and get started. Welcome back to Legal Studies 160, Punishment Culture and Society, Spring 2012. And this is our third class, believe it or not, the Philosophy and Psychology of Retribution. Before we begin, a couple of bookkeeping things. First of all, this is the first week of section, and hopefully you guys already had a section yet? So you're all going to have section this week, those of you that are enrolled. And so let me ask my GSIs if there's any announcements they want to make about their sections. Hannah?
Yes, section 101, which is tomorrow at 12, is in Fleetwood and Moffett. It had been in Barrows, it's in Fleetwood and Moffett, which is just off. It's as though you were going to enter the cafe before you go in. To your left.
Tony, do you have any announcements? Or nope. All right. Show up. And if you're listening on podcast section, unfortunately, is not available to you to enroll at Berkeley. First of all, let me ask, and I'll try to do this if I don't get too far behind. It's the start of your class by asking you if you have any questions, reflections, responses, etc. to our last class. In this case, we've had a whole weekend in between, so I may have recessed into the unreachable parts of your brain. But if there's anything, one thing I know I wanted to add, we were sort of, in a sense, last week was sort of punishment and humanity, or inhumanity week, and we were looking at the prison crisis and the Brown versus Plata case. Then we moved over and looked at a very different kind of humanitarian crisis, if you will, the California's death row, our dysfunctional death penalty, the ballot initiative that will be in front of voters probably this coming November. One thing I want to add there, when you look at these two major modes of punishment, although it's really hardly fair to call capital punishment a major mode of punishment since it is so tiny in actual numbers, even in the active executing states, but certainly it looms large in our imagination. And I just want to draw a point. This comes from Frank Zimmering, our colleague at Berkeley Law and Legal Studies, who's written a lot on the death penalty and many other topics. When you think about how dysfunctional our prisons are and how dysfunctional the death penalty is, you might be tempted to draw a comparison. And indeed, there was a very funny blog post I should try to find for you that was on a blog maintained by a member of the Guards Union, the CCPOA. It's a very funny, very political, very insightful blog that I try to follow. It was during a week in which the three-judge court underlying Brown versus Plata was making some of its findings about how incompetent California prisons are when it comes to keeping their current prisoners alive. And it was in a week when I think a federal court had held that California was too incompetent to execute anybody. And the blog post sort of drew the comparison, said apparently we're excellent at killing prisoners by mistake, but we're not competent to kill them deliberately. And maybe it's only, you would have to be there, I guess, to appreciate the humor of it. It's a grisly topic to be sure. But there is a point here to distinguish, and it underlines one of the reasons why I, at least personally, am a death penalty abolitionist, but I'm not a prison abolitionist. And that is, when we look at the two, I think we have to conclude that as messed up as the prison is, and as messed up as the death penalty is, I don't think we can actually do without the prison, at least not completely. I think we can dramatically downsize it. I think we can use it in very different ways. But I think at the end of the day, it's very hard to imagine the kind of society we live in now with the levels of violence and conflict we have in it, and not have some kind of incarcerative sanctioned system. We can talk more in the course about how far we could go away from our current conceptions of it, how we might reinvent it. I think even the most ardent defender of the death penalty in the state has to concede that that is just not true with the death penalty. That whatever your rationale of punishment is, and we'll talk about them today, it's very hard to explain why you must have the death penalty. So if you're afraid of criminals and you feel like no matter how long they're in prison, they might pose some risk, we have life without parole, or we have life with parole, and with parole is virtually impossible to get anyway. So it doesn't seem like the death penalty is necessarily there. I think the most powerful argument, perhaps, I should note some of the others. Incapacitation, the idea that people need to be restrained while they're in prison, and in fact, most of the ones that you see on death row have had decades of prison time without any disciplinary complaints, problems. Rehabilitation, obviously, the death penalty doesn't really have any edge on that, in a secular sense at least. So you're left with retribution, something we're going to talk about today. And I suppose one frustration that many victims' families feel is that prison isn't somehow enough punishment for the level of anger they feel. And that may be a real complaint, but there are two things to notice about it. One, we're not executing anyone now anyway, so essentially what they have is a prison sentence in which the possibility of death is hanging out there, perhaps for the benefit of the victims. But on the other hand, they also have to address the fact that out of something like 12,000 murders in America last year, and less than 120 death sentences handed down. So there's an awful lot of victims out there that are can't possibly get that kind of justice under any imaginable scheme that we might return to. So at least that's my reflection on. I think the death penalty is a luxury in that precise sense, that it's something that some people would very much like to have and is very expensive, but it's hard to defend as something that's essential and that we need. And therefore, it's one of the reasons I would put a little money, if I were a gambling sort, like Mitt Romney, for instance, on the death penalty going down this year in California. Because I think Californians are feeling very pinched in the pocketbook, very hard up in terms of the things they want their government to do. And it'd be interesting to see what happens. Your questions, or any other questions or comments you might have about the death penalty segment before we move on, please. So, a couple things to say. According to the Pew Charitable Trust website, it costs about $140 a day to keep somebody in a normal prison. Now, if you're life without parole, you might have to be in a, depending how easy it is to win your compliance without any promise of parole eventually, you might need to be in a supermax type prison or secured housing units, which are, as I've mentioned, I think are very problematic from a human rights point of view, but they're also expensive. So that would probably be closer to $200 to $250 a day to hold somebody in that kind of secured custody unit. But when you think about the death penalty, it's not so much the cost of the incarceration. It is true, actually, that our death row inmates, some of them will feel a little bit of a quality of life drop if they do get removed from death row by virtue of this ballot initiative, because instead of having their own cell, which is, as you know, pretty rare in the California very overcrowded system, they'll probably be sharing a cell with somebody else. That's not always desirable. Many people like to have their own cell. So, but you probably won't feel too sorry for them on that one point. But the main point here is that it's not so much the cost of that death row cell that is more expensive than a normal cell. It is a bit more expensive. It's the legal costs. Basically, to execute somebody, to follow them from the time you charge them with a capital crime, the meter is running because the county has to pay for more lawyers to work on the case on both sides, more experts, the appeals, and you have a right to an appeal for most of that process. And so it's the legal costs. When experts have been asked, what could we do to possibly make California's death penalty faster? And this includes the former Chief Justice of the Supreme Court who upheld most of the death penalties he saw, and is no opponent of the death penalty. But what he said is the only real way to do it would be to double or triple the number of defense lawyers that you're hiring to work on these cases. Because by and large, there's such a shortage of lawyers in California willing to do death penalty cases that it takes about 5 years to line out. Once you've been sentenced to death, it takes about 5 years before you've even appointed counsel, who then begins the process of preparing your appeal, which will take another 5 years. The meter's running during all of that time. So it's been estimated that we spend about $140 million a year to run this capital legal system that would basically be gone if all those people were just in prison for life. About $140 million a year. Okay, so today's topic is the philosophy and psychology of retribution. And let me sort of apologize at the outset because these are fascinating in my view and worthy topics within the study of punishment that reflect much of what our colleagues in departments like philosophy and psychology, to some extent economics, when we study deterrence later this week, do. I have traditionally given them no shrift, let alone short shrift in this course, because I tend to focus at a sort of higher level of collective, focusing on social, cultural, political phenomena rather than individual sort of rational actor or other individual approaches. But I think it's very important to actually think about these two together. So I want to talk a little bit today and tomorrow, I should say Thursday, about these approaches to punishment that mainly focus on the individual as the unit of analysis rather than the society, which tends to be where we're going to be most of the time. But as you'll see, I'm going to try to borrow from this really interesting emerging body of research on the psychology, especially of punishment, to suggest some ways that we could think about how the social level of punishment changes over time and what the relationship is between the two levels. So let's start with philosophy, going over to the philosophy department, for instance, and if you study courses on moral philosophy, these are topics that are very important. And it's not just philosophers. My own field of criminology also has been very concerned, at least since the 18th century, with trying to justify punishment in rational terms. And in doing so, philosophers and criminologists, philosophers first and then criminologists later by and large, have identified four major rational justifications for punishment. Right? When I say rational justifications, I kind of mean a justification that is different than saying, I like it. I'm doing it because it feels good. Although, as we'll see, there's a certain level of intersection between these. But the demand for rational justification is a powerful one. And these four justifications we can actually call penal rationales, to express the sense that they are an attempt to justify in rational terms why we punish. Now, perhaps the most famous, or widely cited, commonly identified with rationale of punishment, for instance, when we do surveys and just ask people, we explain to people what these different theories of punishment are, and we ask them which one do you like. A lot of people choose a retribution. And that is basically the idea that a person who has been duly convicted of breaking a law, or at least that subset of law that we consider extremely important and we therefore define as penal or criminal law, it's the idea that a person who breaks one of those laws should be punished, not because it will do something advantageous for our society, like reduce the level of crime in the future, or even that it will make the victim feel better, but because it's the right thing to do in a moral sense, where moral means a rationally defensible moral system. And probably the most famous statement of that comes from the 1797 book, which is translated into English as The Metaphysics of Morals, published by Immanuel Kant near the end of his life in 1797. He writes in an oft-quoted, if much debated, passage, if a civil society were dissolved through the unanimous vote of its members, for example, if an island society decided to dissolve with its members spreading themselves over the rest of the earth, close parentheses, the last murderer within its prison first must be executed so that he experiences what his own deeds are worth, and the blood guilt does not cling to the society that did not insist on the punishment, since, if so, it can be seen as having participated in that public violation of justice. So this is justly a very dramatic statement of this view, the anti-utilitarian view, if you will. The people on this imaginary island society have no corporate interest in what happens next. They're all going as far away from each other as they possibly can get. So it's not the case that the murderer that they don't execute is going to be, it's like, which was it, Silence of the Lambs, where he runs into Hannibal Lecter on his vacation. You don't want to do that if you're leaving the island here. But I think what Kant is suggesting is that the odds of that are virtually zero. And so if you decide that you need to execute the last murderer in your prison, it must be because it's the right thing to do, not because it's going to benefit society. And why is it the right thing to do? Well, Kant, and again, this is a source of much debate within philosophy, what the real meaning of this is. We should do it for that person. Because in order for them to realize the true meaning of their autonomous freedom as a human subject, they have to essentially come to accept that this punishment has been earned by the crimes that they have chosen to do. Now, there's a whirlwind of debate about what that really means. And as you can imagine, and if this were a criminal law class, we'd spend a lot more time talking about if that is true, what does it say about under the conditions under which we ought to punish? Notice that this could be a limit to punish as well as a reason to punish. Because, for instance, if somebody didn't really choose to do their crime, let's say they did it in the midst of a terrible psychotic hallucination in which they were completely misunderstanding the meaning of what they were doing and the people around them, we might feel that it would not be justifiable to punish them for these reasons. And so it's a powerful and much debated position. And as I noted in the recommended reading, some philosophers now think that Kant had a much broader set of ideas about why we should punish rather than just this narrow notion of retribution. Nonetheless, this is a very powerful view, and it's one that we often assume that the general public shares, that we don't really care about things like deterrence, let alone rehabilitation. We just feel like it's right to punish people. Notice that Kant's view, or the philosophical view, is not just that that's a gut feeling, but that it's actually something we arrive at if we were reasoning from rational first principles. So Kant, was born in 1724, died at the beginning of the 19th century, wrote this at the end of the 18th century. And this is really the period when rationales of punishment are being much debated and discussed. Two other common ones. Now, retribution is what is often called a deontological argument. That is a moral or rights-based argument that does not depend on essentially pragmatic or consequentialist considerations. It's usually contrasted with three other purposes of punishment, all of which share the fact that they are, on some level, utilitarian. That word actually largely comes from Jeremy Bentham, who sort of was one of the leading figures in developing utilitarianism as a broad philosophy and political science. And Bentham was a contemporary of Kant's. He was certainly engaged with some of Kant's ideas, and indeed, as the article I recommended suggested, Kant himself seemed to have thought deterrence was a pretty good idea. Deterrence is basically the idea that we associate today with economic thought, that the purpose of punishment is basically to disincentivize bad behavior. If, all of us have surely had the experience of seeing a California highway patrol car, writing a ticket on the side of the road, and guess what? All of us instantly hit the brakes and slow down. We're deterred. We don't want to have that $100 ticket, and when we can see that it's coming, or we fear that it might be coming, we don't even think much. We just act. That is kind of the idea of deterrence, with the idea that it should last longer. And so if we punish somebody, it may be fairly severe punishment in order to make sure that that association between crime and punishment will last a longer time. Another idea that arose in this period and was promoted by some of the same figures, including Jeremy Bentham, is the idea of reform. The purpose of punishing somebody is not just to deter them either individually or other people watching their punishment. It's also to affect some kind of change in their character by subjecting them to penal treatment of some sort. It could be praying in their cell over Bible, which it was in the early 19th century. It could mean some kind of psychotherapy. It could mean some kind of brain surgery, in the future, perhaps. In addition to Jeremy Bentham, here you see Benjamin Rush, who was a patriot physician, a revolutionary thinker and actor in Philadelphia at the time of the Revolution, who was also one of the promoters in this country of the rehabilitative idea. The fourth rationale comes a bit later in the 19th century under the influence of evolutionary and to some extent racist sciences of that period. And that is the idea that punishment works to rationally help society. We have a rational justification to punish, but to remove from society those who pose a danger to others, either directly because they're no longer in society, or because this was very influenced by Darwin and eugenics. If you're locked up, you can't reproduce. And so, as was feared by people like Cesare Lombroso, the founder of scientific criminology in many respects, many criminals are biological criminals that cannot be changed, then taking them out of circulation will also prevent more criminals from being born. That was the idea. Also promoted in the common law world by Sir Francis Galton, one of the inventors of modern statistics and population demography. So there's much one could say, and we will say later in the course, about all of these penal rationales. As I think even this brief summary suggests, there are many aspects of these that could be explored historically, culturally, and politically. It's no accident that all of these form, at least three of the four form at virtually the same time in the 18th century. This is a moment when the twin forces of the philosophical enlightenment, represented by figures like Kant and Bentham and others, as well as the rise of essentially capitalism or commercial society, are putting tremendous pressure on government to be able to justify the power of all sorts, and especially the very problematic kinds of power involved in public penal measures that we're going to study, such as the scaffold execution system, whose breakdown occurred more or less at this time. But in this lecture, what I'd like to do is, instead of focusing up on culture, I want to kind of focus back down on from these philosophical ideas to psychology and ask how these rationales relate to cognition, to human cognition. In short, to what extent do these penal rationales accord with the psychological motivations that actually lead people to punish at the individual level? And what I want to do here is sort of draw on a real revolution in research in cognitive and behavioral and moral psychology that's taken place over the last 25 years or so, using John Darley's excellent review article, Morality in the Law, the Psychological Foundations of Citizens' Desire to Punish Transgressions, which was published in the Annual Review of Law and Social Science and is available, an excerpt on our B-Space. So the headline from this body of research, which I'm going to mention now and then we'll drill down into a bit more. The research on the psychology of punishment essentially affirms that retribution comes closest, at least to any of these rationales, in matching the intuitions that people seem to actually have about why they're motivated to punish. Or to put it more precisely, because as you'll notice in a minute, these experiments that have been done tend to show that people don't actually think through punishment, but they have an intuition that they feel as a judgment, they recognize as a judgment about who should be punished and with some level of intensity. And retribution, in a sense, comes closest to matching what appears to be the unconscious thinking process or cognitive process that's going on here. And this is this notion of punishment as intuitive. As mentioned, he says, when respondents receive a scenario, and this is the typical kind of experiment that is run, you'll be given a scenario in which some person commits a known morally wrong action. Respondents experience a reaction of moral outrage. This becomes a substantial predictor of the relative punishments that will be assigned to the perpetrator of the immoral action. In other words, in these experiments, people are exposed to essentially a story of moral wrongdoing with various manipulations to control sort of the level of moral outrage that might be expected to be taken. The person experiences a sense of moral outrage, and then the experiment goes on to try to gauge who they would punish and sort of how much. And what they find is that sort of the level of the moral outrage that people feel is a predictor in the statistical, scientific sense of how much punishment they'll assign. And the logic here is that although you may think that you have well reflected and deliberated upon penal philosophies of your own, and in fact you may, those are also operating with this intuitive system of reasoning or moral judgment about punishment. So the big headline here is that of all those rationales of punishment, retribution is the one that actually, in some ways, is most natural, fits most naturally into the way people's brains appear to have evolved, and a lot of this comes from evolutionary psychology at this point. Now I have reams, I should say, of doubts about this paradigm in many ways, and there's a lot I could say about it, but really I want to try to use it for our purposes here, but while trying to remind you of some reasons to be skeptical. So first thing I want to mention, because I want to come back to it later in the course, is that of all, he does note, and I just want to highlight this, that of all the other rationales of punishment, besides retribution, the one that Darley seems to acknowledge can't really be eliminated from the natural mindset of these experimental subjects is incapacitation. And this comes up in experiments where they essentially create something like a three strikes rule, that is where people are going to be punished not just for the crime that they've committed now, but for past crimes or for having a bad record. And what they find is that people do want to punish those people more. You can call it a recidivism premium. Now, where is that coming from? If it's pure incapacitation, we should assume it comes from a sense of the person's dangerousness. But what the experiments seem to show is that subjects actually perceive these recidivists as more outrageous. They essentially code their sort of dangerousness as another reason to be angry at them, to view them as morally outrageous. The reason I point that out is that, and this runs right through the paper as a problem, even though retribution may accord with our gut intuitions, if you are brain intuitions, I should say more precisely, about who to punish, how much to punish, it doesn't appear to tell us in any absolute sense how much to punish them, right? So the experiments can show, and do show, that most people agree that, for instance, a rapist should be punished more than somebody who's a thief. But what there is no necessary agreement on is how much should the rapist be punished, how much should the thief be punished. We can do the relational part, but we can't necessarily do the absolute part. And the reason I think that's very consequential is that there may not be any inherent length built into the idea of retribution, that is length of imprisonment, if that's our main form of punishment. But when we come to incapacitation, there's an inherent bias toward long, right? Because if we're going to protect ourselves from somebody by locking them away from us, there's not much point in doing that for a short period of time, unless you think they're going to change in a relatively short period of time. We can come back to that. But the point is, my hypothesis, which I want to note here and we can explore later in the course, is that when many people make judgments they think are retributive, they're also incorporating an incapacitative preference in there that is actually supersizing, or at least cooperating with supersizing their level of punishment they're willing to accept or tolerate or support. But I want to, otherwise, I don't want to really spend too much time critiquing this. I mean, we again can be skeptical. It's unclear how accurately these highly artificial experimental situations can capture the judgments they're trying to model, and I'll give you an example in a moment. It's also unclear how well these have been tested cross-culturally. Some of the new game experiments are being done with groups and players around the world, although by, there are people around the world who can have access to the internet and participate in that kind of first world activity. Most of the other experiments have been done here in the United States, so query whether they're really generalizable to other cultures, not so clear. Moreover, there may be a kind of tautology here. If retribution is about desert, that is, we're punishing you because you deserve to be punished, not because it's doing anything. And the question we ask is, well, read the story, now tell me who deserves to be punished. We may be prompting them to choose retribution because we're asking them who deserves punishment. If we ask them, you're police chief of San Jose, what would you do to reduce crime in these neighborhoods? They might have a different answer. They might view themselves as having a different agenda in that situation. But in a way, I want to put aside all these objections, and for present purposes, I want to assume that this retributive primacy is a robust finding that we can rely on, and I want to draw some, I think, important implications and questions from it. So first of all, let me note that the basic story here of retributive punishment as an intuition is a part of this larger revolution in cognitive psychology, summarized by the very pioneer in the field himself, Daniel Kahneman, in a recent popular book called Thinking Fast and Slow, which some of you may have read, or at least received over the holidays. But in any event, what this body of research shows is that we actually have two whole independent cognitive systems. One is called System 1, appropriately, and the other is called System 2. System 1 is what we associate with intuitions and also perceptions. It's fast, it's sort of emotional, that is, it comes along often with powerful emotions. It appears to be unconscious, that is, people aren't aware that they're forming these judgments or these perceptions. They just see it, they just feel it. And if we try to get them to reconstruct their reflections that got them there, they really can't do it, or else they're artificially trying to figure out how they would have gotten there.